Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today on our webinar for virtual hiring, interviews, and etiquette. We are really excited to have our guest alumni speaker, which I will introduce in a second. My name is Sarah Basinger. I am the Alumni Career Counselor at the Alumni Career Services Office at Tulane. So again, thank you so much for coming, and we are excited to talk about this topic today, and I hope you can learn a lot from it. So quick introduction, if you are not familiar with the B Field Alumni House, we are located on the corner of Willow and Calhoun on the Uptown campus. When we are able to come back together and you find yourself on campus, please stop by. It's a beautiful place to work. So for today, we have Andrew Parisi. As you can see, he is a B School grad from 08 and 09, and he currently is the Global Integrity Manager for Product Data Operations for Facebook. I'm actually going to hand it over to Andrew to do a little bit more of an introduction, and then we'll go into some topic areas. So Andrew, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually fixed the microphone issue, so we're good to go.
Oh, it sounds great. Awesome.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Pleasure to speak with you today. Really excited to help bring clarity to any style of interviewing that you may be dealing with in the current times, but also in non-COVID times. This will be an increasingly frequent way that you will realize that employers are kind of expanding their reach in terms of how they interview candidates. Less on site, more on VC. It's becoming a much bigger trend. We do a lot of this at Facebook. And just really, and just in general, really excited to talk to all of you. I always try to contribute to as many alumni items as I possibly can, because I think it's really useful to kind of give back to the Tulane community. And then just about me, just generally speaking, I graduated from Tulane 08 and 09, got my master's. I worked at Bloomberg for a really extended period of time, about 8 years, until I made the transition to Facebook just recently. And so just to give you an idea of what that title even means, I basically am responsible for the integrity human operations for developing automation at Facebook to keep the community safe.
Awesome, thank you. Thanks for that background, and we're so excited to have you as a expert and to get your insight today. So just some kind of quick information. As some of you might know, some of you might not know, like Andrew just said, Facebook has been doing virtual interviews for quite some time now. And this isn't a new thing for most tech companies. So this is definitely going to be, again, coming back to what Andrew said, this is going to be a new way of moving forward with interviews. If you think about, pre-COVID and current online education, doctor's visits, these have all proven to be really meaningful, have meaningful interactions without having to meet in person. So if you do have experience with online classrooms and doctor's visits, that's something to think about in terms of your own experience. And as we all probably know, virtual meetings are not going away anytime soon, or probably at all. And so this is what we're going to talk about today, and moving forward, it's going to be really important to learn the best way to be an interactive attendee, contributing to the conversation in a really positive way. Andrew, you touched on it real briefly, but I would love for you to go into it a little bit deeper in terms of what is Facebook's history for virtual interviews and using this type of onboarding and hiring practice.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we really try to do at Facebook is operate at scale and try to be really efficient with our time and resources and otherwise. So it's very common, as an example, for not just even like an intro, like the idea of a phone screen, for that to be during a VC, as well as even first round interviews to be through VC as well. When I originally interviewed for Facebook a couple years ago, I would say that we primarily did all of the interviews via VC, in order to optimize for people's time. Believe it or not, I actually went on site for on-site interviews, and because the Facebook campus is so large, I actually had to VC with people in other areas of the campus, even though I was on site. So as you can see, this is becoming a very, very common item. The other thing that I would also just highlight is as companies go through this current time with COVID-19 and otherwise, one of the things that every company is reflecting on is what is their remote work strategy. And so I would expect that this to continue. Facebook, as one example, has pledged to bring about 15,000 workers in a purely remote environment, never even setting foot in an office over the course of the next 10 years. So VC is becoming a more frequent and common collaboration tool, and it's going to be baked into most companies' ecosystems in terms of how we continue to do work going forward. So it's completely embedded, VC versus in-person. It's a hybrid model, but it's going to start to shift more to VC. And that's not just in interviews, but also in the workplace.
Very interesting. Thank you. That's a huge number. So that's exciting about the 15,000. Quick logistical question for you, Andrew. I might be the only one on this call that isn't super clear. VC, virtual communication, or does that mean something else?
Oh, sorry, virtual conference.
Conference. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Just wanted to double check.
And please call me out on any type of acronyms if I'm using that style of lingo. That's a no-no.
Sure, absolutely, absolutely. These are all going to be questions for you, Andrew. What are the differences between in-person and virtual interviews?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that oftentimes is important to think about in a virtual environment is that all of your mannerisms, the way that you carry yourself, the visual representation is magnified because you effectively have removed all of your surroundings from the focal point. So when you're in a room with someone, you might be able to look at something that's on the wall, or you may ponder by not looking at someone in the eye, or you may take a sip of, water and kind of, look at, in conference rooms, for example, may look out the window and all these other things. But the fact of the matter is that when you're on a virtual interview, it's just you and that individual, and you're going to be staring at each other the entire time, and there's no outlets, right? So everything will start to feel magnified. And then the way that you present yourself will have to be different. The other major thing that I would highlight is that it's easy to lose nuance and communication over any medium that's not in-person communication. So even though that this is virtual and you're viewing the person, there will be delays in response. It's easy to talk over people because you're not sure when you lose that ability to understand when someone will end their statement, and so on. So the timing and the nuance of your communication usually needs to be more specific and more detailed than it would have been in another environment, because you can miss out on some of those small details.
I feel like that's something that I wouldn't have thought of. So thank you. Okay, what makes candidates stand out in virtual interviews? And I want to just add on actually a kind of a second question to that. Can you, with this answer, can you also talk about some, like, maybe you will, but like prep? I mean, you talked about all of those nuances on the difference between in-person and virtual. Like, how can somebody practice or make sure that they're not falling into those areas that you pointed out?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of what makes candidates stand out, I think there's a couple, I'll name a few things. It's certainly not going to be exhaustive. But some of the things that make candidates stand out, clear and concise communication. You'll see that this is a theme that I'm going into here. Being able to take a thought or a statement from beginning to end and tell a story effectively. Think of it this way: the more times that you go back and forth on a VC, on a virtual interview, the more difficult the conversation will become. Because anytime you're switching speakers in a virtual environment, again, there could be deferrals, there could be cadence issues, there could be a drop in connection, there could be many other factors that basically make the conversation more disjointed. So you want to make sure that each of your individual thoughts is comprehensive, thoughtful, tells a story, and gets to the point of the question in a self-contained way that you want to minimize follow-up. So people who are really strong at telling that story come through really well in virtual interviews. The other thing that I would say to stand out is just general presence, and understanding it still does come through. So your ability to own yourself and your response and the way that you communicate outward in a way that feels that you are confident, sure, and can speak to the nuance of that question effectively is going to come through the same exact way in a virtual interview as it would in person. some things and like tips that I would think about here is like use the virtual environment to your advantage. So something that I do when I'm interviewing candidates in a virtual environment is I have notes up on one side while I'm viewing them, right? So it's very, very easy is have your notes up on the screen at the same time that you're interviewing. So that way, if you think about it, if you're looking into your webcam, you're looking at the individual, but the notes are really right next to you. So put them up side by side. It's a very, very easy way to take advantage of being in a virtual environment, which you may feel it may look a little strange or awkward if you're looking down at notes when you're in a non-virtual environment. So that is actually a scenario where you can take advantage of that. I would also just highlight, what will help you stand out is make sure that you feel comfortable. This kind of goes back to how you present yourself. One of the benefits of doing a virtual interview is that you actually are in complete control of your environment. So, for example, if you go into, in on-site interview or in person, you may be unfamiliar with the conference room. It could be hot, it could be cold. You may be concerned about how early you're going to get there. Will you sit in the lobby? There's all these unknowns that you don't know how it will play out. The best part about a virtual interview is that you control your entire environment. So make yourself comfortable, put yourself in a position where there are no distractions, and allow yourself to really shine through as the premier candidate that they're trying to match. So basically remove all the unknowns that you don't need to worry about, that you would have needed to worry about in on-site. And that has really helped people, from my experience, actually be able to answer more effectively because they're less worried about a lot of the externalities.
This is such great insight. Thank you. Okay, so how you talked about technical issues. How do you handle those with Zoom, Webex? I know for me, my Zoom tends to freeze at least once a meeting. What's your advice for navigating that?
Yes, so I think there are a couple things. I think the primary item will be twofold. One is just when you accidentally talk over each other, which is like not quite a technical issue, but it is something that is caused by the technology, if that makes any sense. So let's call it, if you're in a scenario where you end up talking over each other too much or otherwise, my recommendation is just take a step back and just always offer up, the interviewer, the opportunity to clarify or to speak first. Because most of the time, the plan of the interviewer would have been in that scenario to provide clarifying information. So it's actually a good opportunity for you to step back and level set. The more times that you request the interviewer to do something on your behalf, whether that be clarifying something or allowing them to go first or anything like that, it also gives you more time to prep in your mind for how you want to respond. In terms of technical issues, explicitly, the most common is obviously going to be internet connection, people freezing, people dropping out, et cetera, et cetera. My recommendation is the first time that you see any sign of technical issues, turn off the camera. If there's any second sign of technical issues, dial in on the phone. Don't even bother working on troubleshooting in that exact moment. This may be the only 30 minutes that you get. Make sure that every 30 minutes to an hour, whatever it is focused on you, not on the platform. And the easiest way to do this is just take the audio directly to the phone. Do not worry about the visual representation. Do not worry about whether or not your internet is working or not. Just take it to the phone sooner rather than later, and that way you preserve your time and your space to sell yourself for that specific role.
When just to again, kind of a logistical question, if I'm in an interview and I'm having those glitches, before I go to the phone, is it important for me to send like a quick chat to let them know what's going on, or like how do you navigate that transition?
Yeah, and that's actually a really good call out. Here's a seasoned interviewer will actually control this. Like, it should be, in an ideal environment, the interviewer should be the one controlling this. For Facebook, the way that we do this is basically we have a series of fallbacks. And so we have, as interviewers, we have guidance on how you handle that fallback. We, for example, have access to everyone's personal email. We have, whether that be, an online portal, whether that be an individual phone number that we can call, or otherwise we have a system of checks and balances. So my recommendation there is you'll probably have to go by the company guidance, but if you have an opportunity before the interview even starts, for example, if you're talking with the recruiter about the preparation for the interview, or like you get the invite for the for the interview or otherwise, explicitly ask and set that expectation. Hey, if we have internet connection issues or we have technical troubleshooting issues, what is the fallback method, and how can I continue on the conversation, and what is the notification that we'll get? Basically, take control of your own destiny. Do not assume that the company will be thoughtful, like I think Facebook is. It's not to say other companies aren't, but like you could interview with anyone who has their own protocol. I've seen lots of stuff out there, and they may not necessarily think about that as a trigger. So my guidance would be to set that expectation up front with the individual recruiter, so that you are in control of the way that you can manage your time.
Great, thank you. So you touched on some pitfalls to avoid. Is there, just kind of open it up to you, are there other pitfalls that you would recommend avoiding or to watch out for?
Yeah, so I would say definitely, and this will be, I think we will indeed cover this as part of the next section, but remove any and all distractions from your virtual environments, that would prevent someone from focusing on you. Again, you'll see a theme here is that you want to sell yourself to these people, that are hiring you. So don't allow them to focus on anything else aside from you and the role and your fit for that role. So minimize distractions, around you in the environments, whether that be something that'll be distracting to the interviewer or distracting to yourself, so that you can focus on them. Test all of your equipment ahead of time. Basically check, what is my webcam look like? What is it focused on? Is my audio coming in clearly? Do a test call or a test run with some people or otherwise, and just get your full setup. So while these aren't necessarily pitfalls, what these are guardrails, I would say. But they're all to essentially avoid the attention being on the interview process, as in the technology or the way that you two are connecting. Make sure that the attention is not on that. Make sure the attention is on you. And so I think that is like the guiding principle that I would provide on that side of things.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so we're going to take a quick break from the questions for a second, just to talk about etiquette. And Andrew, I'd love for you to jump in. You talked a lot about this, actually. Obviously dress as you would for an in-person interview. You talked about the environment, so making sure it's quiet, no distractions, as you already mentioned. So I'm curious, in terms of having a notebook and pen nearby to write down important information. First, I think that's really helpful for a lot of people. Is it also, I guess, how does it look if someone works better typing? Do you have a preference either way on that one?
Yeah, I don't have a preference in my opinion. Neither should the interviewer, to be quite honest with you. If you're in person at an interview, I fully expect that someone is going to be taking notes, or they have a notebook out, and they can take notes for whatever reason they want. It's not something that we pry into or anything of that nature. That's supposed to be a facilitation of them doing that interview. To me, typing is exactly the same. At least in my experience doing virtual interviews, it's also my expectation. If you want to take notes, if you want to type stuff or otherwise, the only call out that I would have is that, and I'm guilty of this, my keyboard is loud. So just be aware that if you are taking notes, that you are muted, and that you don't have that ambient noise coming in. I'm a very, very loud typer, and I get called out on that on video calls on a regular basis. So just make sure that that is not part of the audio.
Good call on that one. I'm actually not going to read through most of these because I know that everybody in attending can check those out, and you've talked a lot about it. The last thing, but I do think it's important to be mindful of your facial expressions and be an active listener. I personally have a face that is very expressive. What advice do you have for someone like me that shows a lot of emotion, and how to curtail that, or is that a good thing?
Yeah, absolutely. So here's a little tip that I use because I'm the same way as well. Um, and but as I stated earlier, because you are the entire focal point, because you are not in a room, there are no other distractions being in person. Since you are that vocal point or focal point, many visual representations of your reaction to something that someone says or otherwise, they're all going to be magnified. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but just keep in mind that it will accentuate itself in a virtual environment. So one of the things that I do is that in most video conference applications, whether that be um, Zoom or GoToMeeting or any of these other conference applications, there's two views. There's the view of yourself, and there's the view of the person who's interviewing you. The interviewer is going to be giving you way less signal than you are giving that interviewer. So the way that I would do it is I would actually flip the view. And so what I mean by that is you make the large view yourself, and you make the small view the interviewer. Means that it will have a big blast of yourself on your computer screen, so get comfortable with yourself. However, what it does is it'll allow you to understand the nuances that you wouldn't have been able to see if you had it as that like small box in the corner. So for me, as an example, one thing that I noticed one time, this was not on an interview, but it was actually on a different call with Tulane students, in terms of Zoom. Before I did that flip, I realized that I was leaning in really close to the webcam. So it looked like everyone had a really, really good visual representation of my forehead, rather than, and I didn't look that bad on the small corner, but it was really pronounced when I saw that if someone was looking that as me, the primary speaker on a much larger application or screen, it was very obvious that it was distracting, right? So my guidance there is flip the image so that you can see the self-image of yourself big and the interviewer small. That is a personal preference, but that's the way that I handle this.
No, that makes a lot of sense. That's a great tip. So last thing is do not forget to send a thank you message within 24 hours. I know that this to some might sound very obvious. Nicole Bush and I, she's our director for Alumni Career Services. We are constantly reminding people to send thank you notes or thank you messages. So please do